Welcome to Navigating the Customer Experience, the podcast for anyone serious about delivering exceptional customer experiences. Leaders, innovators, and service champions share real strategies and real stories to help you create customers for life. Here's your host, Yanique Grant.
Welcome to Navigating the Customer Experience. On today's episode, our guest is Dan Balcauski. Every SaaS company is asking the same question right now. How do we price AI? And so Dan has spent 20 years in software as an engineer, moving through product management and eventually discovering that how companies capture value matters more than how they build it. He founded Product Tranquility to help B2B SaaS CEOs turn pricing from a confusing liability into a strategic advantage. He's currently helping SaaS companies navigate AI pricing and packaging decisions, including how to set usage caps with no historical data, when to bundle AI versus sell it separately, and why the first AI price is always wrong. Before Product Tranquility, Dan was a principal product strategist at SolarWinds and head of product at Lawn Starter. He holds a BSc in computer engineering from Iowa State University and an MBA from the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern, where he also helps teach executive education courses on product strategy. So without further delay, sit back, plug your earphones in, and let's jump right into this conversation with Dan. Welcome, Dan.
Good to be here. Thank you for the wonderful intro. You did your homework.
All right, Dan, can you share with our listeners a little bit about your journey in your own words? Share with us how you got from where you were to where you are today.
Yeah, you did a good job in recapping some of the highlights of the bio. As you mentioned, been in software for a couple decades. I find that over time, I thought I was going to be a good engineer. It did not suit my personality. The computer did not care. At that time, how mad I got at it, it didn't do any better. Now, Claude might actually put a little bit more effort into it if you yell at it enough times. But it was not the case when I started the space 20 years ago, and really found myself drawn to how do companies decide even what to build. That led me to take on more management responsibilities and roadmap responsibilities. And I got to a point in that path that I was like, I need to go figure out. I'm now away from my engineering training. I need to really go learn how this is done, which led me to pursue my MBA. That catapulted into kind of my first test in the pricing world, where I took courses on pricing when I was getting the MBA. And those were very valuable. But during my MBA, I did an internship for a successful Silicon Valley startup. And one of the questions on the CEO's desk was, should they do a freemium model for their existing offerings? And long story short, I do not recommend freemium except in very exceptional, rare circumstances for almost any B2B software company. I've talked many times publicly about that, so I won't belabor it here. But that was my first major sort of foray into the official pricing world. And then after that, took on product leadership roles at a couple different companies. And there, it was not directly responsible for pricing, as I think is correct. Product marketing in most B2B software companies should be responsible for pricing, and we could go into why that is. But a lot of those folks didn't really know what they were doing either. And so they'd say, hey, I get asked to do this pricing exercise, and I'm really good at writing blogs and making messaging copy and doing competitor analysis. I have no idea how to do this. You've got an MBA. Can you help me figure it out? And cut my teeth helping on some of those projects, tried to apply some of the templates and techniques I thought I learned in class, and realized that, pricing everywhere is not the same. What pricing airline seats or hotel reservations looks very different than selling shampoo or deodorant. It looks very different than selling B2B software. And I got those scars, so you don't have to. Eventually decided to start my own company and found that a lot of other companies had struggles with pricing and packaging. So now I have the privilege of helping those companies every day. As you mentioned, often is a sort of confusing liability, and you try to help them turn that into a strategic asset.
Amazing. All right. So tailing out of your last statement and also your bio, first AI price is always wrong claim. You said the first AI price is always wrong. Why is that? And what should a SaaS company do differently knowing they're going to get it wrong the first time?
Yeah. So this has nothing to do with how smart your people are, the consultants that you hire, It has everything to do with we are going through a massive fundamental economic change in the software business right now. And AI adds costs, but has anybody noticed there's a ton of investment going on? Everyone is trying to add AI to their products, which is changing the competitive landscape and your differentiated value. The cost component is changing dramatically. There was a report I saw where they did a benchmark of OpenAI's world-class model from a year ago. I think it was like '03 at the time versus state-of-the-art model at the time the report was written. And the cost per task had decreased by 390x. So when you have no business has that level of disruption in their supply chain, right? We worry about, oh, we've got another war in the Middle East and gas prices went up, what, 20%? We're talking about a 400,000% change in your underlying cost of goods sold. And also that's the cost side. The value side is also changing where the models are getting more intelligent. They can handle tasks today that they couldn't last month or even last week. And so with all of that, I'll also add that I've looked at all the companies that have released AI, not 100%. I can't claim total omniscience, but I've done a lot of research in the companies that have released AI capabilities, software companies, application layer, not just the foundation model companies. And 100% of them have revised pricing and packaging within 18 months. So with that, going back to, okay, that's great. What do we do about it? I think the mindset that's most important is agility and change. I think we got lulled into a false sense of security by the last 10, 15 years of SaaS. Maybe a lot of folks weren't around when we went into the perpetual software to subscription. A lot of companies did make that transition. And then it wasn't uncommon to hear folks who went to the last 3 years of SaaStr or SaaStock being like, oh, we used to always get these new SaaS playbooks and I used the new metric of the year that I'm supposed to track. And all of a sudden, I'm not really learning anything anymore. Yeah, because we kind of had learned what that model is about. We learned about CAC to LTV ratios and ARR versus bookings revenue and all of these metrics that now just become the water that we swim in. And so therefore, we're now in another major change where we're having to learn this as we go with these fundamental economic things that are economic changes under the hood. And so it's not only that, so the change is happening rapidly. We're going to learn because we have to. The technology is changing. Our competitors are changing. Whether we want to stay in place or not, it is not a choice we get to make. And then along with that, I think the dominant point I want to make sure folks get across is that with all that change, communication becomes paramount. So communication to your customers, probably primarily, but then also communication internally. When you're in a static environment, maybe you have a pricing review annually. If you're doing well, most companies might not even look at it once every 5 years. Best in class companies are doing it at least quarterly. So you want to make sure the senior executive team has clear line of sight into what the frontline folks are saying and that those communication channels are open and that you're evaluating this on a much more rapid cadence than you may have in the past. And then where we see a lot of pricing changes blow up is not that companies are changing it, but that they're communicating it poorly or not at all. And so those are, I'd say, I'll stop because that was a long rant. I'll see where you want to go, but I would say those are the primary areas I would encourage folks to think about.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing, Dan. All right. So many companies are trying to set usage caps and pricing tiers for AI, right? For the features that AI have. And a lot of times they're doing this with zero historical data to guide them. Can you just walk us through how you'd advise a CEO to make that decision when they're essentially flying blind?
Yeah, no, it's a real problem. Let's say I'll use a concrete example so people can follow the logic. When I have a CRM and we plug in OpenAI or Anthropic model under the hood and we say, hey, now you can summarize all the account history with this customer. Who is involved? What other sales reps touched it? What support issues did they have? Because a lot of that stuff is messy, text data over time. And the AI is really good about bringing together messy text data, right? So now we have an AI summarization capability, or now we can generate the next email in your campaign, in your outreach to that person based upon their history. And so there's now a real underlying cost to that, right? Because now there's money going out the door for those tokens to OpenAI or Anthropic. And the CFO is definitely getting that bill. The COO and the CFO are like, oh my God, what are we doing here? So I think there's a real valid concern that, hey, we need to rein this in. But when you're launching one of these features, the problem is you're like, I know what a token costs, but I don't know what my customers are going to do with this piece of software. I don't know about you, but I've been in product management a long time. Products are filled with the hopes and dreams of the future that just became another feature in the product that barely anyone adopted. And your AI features don't get to skip that step of the innovation cycle. They're also going to be, people are going to be look at it, be like, oh, that's neat. I don't really understand how I would use it. And then you're going to have the early adopters in your organization, usually the engineers, but could be in any part of the org. You probably have 5% or so of folks in your org who fit this bill who are like, oh my God, this thing's changed my workflow. I'm going to use it all the time. I'm going to set up loops so it's running overnight. So in the morning, I've got all my emails queued up and all my boxes, my leads summarized, the whole plan. And so we have these extremes and we have to figure out how are we going to plan for this. So the first idea is we'll look at proxies. So this helps us summarize data that we have in a dashboard. Let's look at how many people open those dashboards per month. Sounds reasonable, except if AI is really doing its job, you may expect people will use this more than they were looking at your dashboards because it's easier. I look at a dashboard I've never opened in Tableau that someone else has built. It takes me 20 minutes just to even figure out what I'm looking at. But I ask AI, I say, hey, how did our campaign operate last month? And give me the details. How did that differ between EMEA and North America? And it's just giving you the data. You're like, oh my God, this is awesome. I'm getting all this insight. I would have had to search for hours before, so I never even bothered. So the proxy breaks down in that regard. Okay, we have a beta program. I mentioned before, maybe you have these early adopters that are like 5%. Kyle Poyer is another pricing expert out in the field who I really appreciate his content. And I think it was the first time I don't know if he invented it, but very much Pareto rule 80-20, 10% of your users drive 90% of your usage or costs with these tools. And so there's a slim chance that your beta group, which is already going to be a limited subset of customers, is going to match the overall usage profile once this thing is in market. So what are folks doing instead? They're usually, if you're not familiar with software development, obviously most folks may have heard of beta, but after beta usually goes general availability, or what you say GA. So companies are putting in an additional stage called early access. So early access is, we're out of beta. This thing is baked. We're happy for customers to use it, but it gives us a time period that is dictated by special commercial terms. So what does that mean? We're going to announce our limits. We're going to communicate them to customers. We're going to put a price on these features, whether it's an add-on or it's embedded in the product with an additional usage flag. But we're not going to enforce those limits or meter that. So you're not going to see that on your invoice for some time period. And I've seen early access periods anywhere from 6 weeks to 18 months. And so what that allows companies to do is get customers to really adopt it in their workflows with the understanding that, I don't know about you, but like somebody's, hey, use my thing. And you're like, is it going to cost me? I don't know. Am I going to max out my credit card in an afternoon? And maybe with some of the new Anthropic models, that's very possible. You're like, I'm just not going to touch it at all because I don't want to have that conversation with my CFO when he gets the bill at the end of the month. So what they're doing is they're easing that user anxiety to actually encourage that adoption, that flywheel, make it habit forming, get the feedback around what are usage patterns, what are the cases that customers are doing that we didn't thought of, what's working well, what's not working well. And that really helps get a grounding in, okay, my actual usage patterns during that period versus, again, some of these proxies that folks might be tempted to use but end up breaking down.
All right. Perfect. Thank you so much. Great explanation and support for how it is that you were able to advise the CEO. And quite insightful because, as you mentioned, it's a gray area and it can run costs up significantly. So I like the early access option that they have now that will allow them to utilize and give the customer the opportunity to take availability of what is there.
I was going to separate. There's a nuance in there as well because the idea this sometimes gets overlooked, but we often have what we have is price fences, or when you were talking about those usage limits for AI, I hate tokens, but I'll just use that. Say, oh, we'll use the AI summaries, the account summaries. So you get 1,000 account summaries per month per user, right? That's part of your plan. But we're not going to enforce that right now because we just want you to use it. And so for all the reasons I just said. But there's also what we term fair use limits. And so there is the case where it's like, hey, we've got somebody who's using this product or this AI capability 100 or 1,000x more than our average user. And we need a way to really say, hey, we're going to stop this. And companies already have stuff like this, for example, for API requests. Hey, we don't monetize AI or API access, but if you start sending 1 million requests per second, we reserve the right to throttle your requests because you're not allowed to take down our system for all of our other customers. Right? And that's usually in the fine print. And because that's could be a nuance or a pushback. So if we don't enforce it, like we're just opening the floodgates. No, you have, hey, here's what we're going to commercial terms. We also reserve the right, if you're using it quote unquote excessively, to either trim your usage, throttle you to a cheaper model. There's a whole bunch of different things that can be done in there, but those are other levers that you could play while you're in that early access period and trying to figure things out so that the CFO doesn't have a stroke.
All right, perfect. Thank you for that additional information. All right, now, Dan, can you share with us what's the one online resource, tool, website, or application that you absolutely cannot live without in your own business?
Oh man, it's all Claude all the time these days, but I feel that that's passe to say Claude is my work surface at this point.
Okay.
So
Claude
Claude code specifically.
All right, perfect. Thanks for sharing. Can you also share with our listeners maybe 1 or 2 books that you've read? It could be a book that you read a very long time ago, or even one that you have read recently, but it has had a positive impact on you, whether personally or professionally.
In the pricing domain or in any domain?
In any domain.
Yeah, most of my reading these days is around the pricing domain. If I'm into long form books, I tend to, like with everyone else, probably too much time on social media and blog posts otherwise. So I would say if folks are really interested in stepping their toes into the water on this pricing topic, there's a good book called Monetizing Innovation that I recommend folks read. It's approachable, but also pragmatic and useful for this pricing world. One of the first books I read in the domain outside of the coursework.
Okay. And you said it's Monetizing Innovation.
That's correct.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much for sharing. Can you also share with our listeners what's one thing that's going on in your life right now that you're really excited about? Either something you're working on to develop yourself or your people.
My current passion project is all about building personal software to better run the business. And so which I don't think is a story that is unique here, but it's the first time that I've been back on the coding side. Maybe that's overstating. I tell Claude what to build and it builds it for me, but dusting off the old software engineering chops to keep an eye on it, make sure it doesn't go off the rails, to figure out, okay, what should my networking system look like? What should my run a podcast, or building all the systems and flows there. As running a podcast is very intensive. There's a lot of steps just to produce a single episode, let alone a season, or do it weekly or even more frequently than that. And so I think we're in a really unprecedented time to fill those nooks with a bunch of tools that are custom built to how you want to work that just would have not been economically viable to invest in before.
Yeah, perfect. All right. Thank you so much for sharing. All right, Dan. So our listeners would have tapped into this episode and they're quite intrigued with your journey. They're quite intrigued with your organization and a lot of the information that you'd have shared here with us today. And they would like to connect with you online. Where's the best place that they can find you online?
Probably LinkedIn. Yeah, just if you send me follow, that's fine. Or if you want to send me a connection request, that's fine. Just drop a note saying you heard me on the podcast so I can separate it from the rest of the LinkedIn spam. Also, my website's producttranquility.com. So folks can also reach me there. I run a podcast, so SaaS Scaling Secrets, wherever podcasts are found. So
Awesome. All right. Now, before we wrap our episodes up, we always like to ask our guests, do you have a quote or a saying that during times of adversity or challenge, you'll tend to revert to this quote? If for any reason you get derailed or you get off track, the quote helps to get you back on track. Do you have one of those?
yeah, it's don't borrow problems from the future.
Don't borrow problems. Can you expound on that for us?
Yeah, we all, maybe not in American culture, debt is not treated with the gravitas that it deserves, but that's always borrowing money from our future selves to pay now. Last thing we want to do is borrow problems in the future and bring them to ourselves now. So a lot of our anxiety, worry is about things that haven't happened yet. And we're worried like, oh, but if this happens, then I'll be in this situation. Yeah, but you're borrowing that problem that hasn't happened yet from the future so you could have more problems now. So don't borrow problems.
All right. Amazing. So we'll have that quote reference in the show notes of our episode. All right, Dan, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule today and hopping on this podcast and sharing all of this amazing information about AI and you being able to inform SaaS organizations about pricing strategies, especially with the integration of AI in many of their different platforms across the services that they provide to their customers. And just being able to be so transparent in giving us information in a very practical way that will allow our listeners to be really in that introspection space, I believe, to identify where could they be doing things differently to ensure that they're maximizing on serving their customers in the best possible way. And I think you were able to help them realize that today. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Just want to remind our listeners that you can follow us on X at Navigating CX and feel free to join our private Facebook group, Navigating the Customer Experience Community. Until next time, I'm your host, Yanique Grant.
Thank you for tuning in to Navigating the Customer Experience. If you got value from today's episode, subscribe, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a review. Connect with Yanique at yaniquegrant.com. Until next time, keep navigating.